Hello and good morning. So I'm having another go at doing one of these YouTube video tutorial things as you asked me to do. You asked that I do one that very briefly considers your research methods proposal. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go through it in a very generic way though, because obviously your proposals will be specific to the things that you're interested in. But basically the research proposal is doing two things. The first of all, it's an assignment, it's an assessed piece of work, and you need to do it. But the most important aspect of this assignment is actually for you to think about what your thesis is going to be about, what's its purpose, and how are you going to do your piece of research. So if you think about a doctorate is awarded on the basis of making an original contribution to knowledge. So whenever I do a viva, I will always ask students at the end, okay, and so what's your original contribution to knowledge? Because hopefully they'll have thought about that all the way through, and it's the one question at least that they can prep for. So basically what you're trying to do with this research proposal is highlighting an area where you think there's a need. So in your introduction to your research proposal, you're going to say, so I'm interested in looking at this particular area, and this is the background and this is the rationale for this research. So basically there's an issue, there's a problem, or there's just something that's curious that you feel that your research would be useful to do because it would enable us to understand a little something more about that area than we did before. So when you're making an original contribution to knowledge, you're not coming up with brand new theories or brand new ideas. Well, you might, but you're not expected to. You may just be adding a tiny bit to the puzzle, and that could just be that you're doing something in a slightly different way, or you're doing something with a different type of group of people, or you're doing it using different methods. So you don't have to be changing the world, but you have to have a context. So there has to be a reason for the research, and a rationale. So what it is that you hope that your research will enable us to know and do as a consequence of that knowledge, I suppose. So you have to have a little bit of a literature review. So if you may remember, and it might seem like a long time ago now, but when you were in the first year of the EdD, I told you that there's no research that you can come up with that's not been thought about before. So even though you might be taking a different angle, or you might be looking at it in a different way, most things have been addressed because people have been thinking about the big questions for thousands of years, I suppose. But what you have to do with your literature review then is to demonstrate that you understand some of that literature. When I was doing my doctorate, I used to spend most of my time feeling anxious that I'd missed a really important piece of work, a really important theory, or a really important piece of research that I was going to get caught out in my viva, that I didn't know it. You're not expected to know everything, but basically you're just giving us a bit of a mapping of the literature in your area and showing us how your research is going to fit within that. So maybe that literature is helping you to develop your ideas. Maybe it's because you're critiquing the ideas, or maybe it's because your research is going to be contributing in a nice way to that research. And so then that hopefully enables you then to say, so this is my topic, this is why it's interesting, this is what we know about it already, and this is where I'm hoping mine's going to come in and fit. Then that leads you nicely onto the research methods. So sort of the bulk of your research proposal is in this area, because you're going to talk at length about what the aims and objectives are of your research. So although you've got this great topic, you know where it fits in the literature, what's the point of doing it? So what are the aims? What do you hope to be able to find out through your research? And the objectives, which are quite connected. And the objectives is, what do you hope that the knowledge that you generate will enable us to do? So maybe you want to find out why girls don't aspire to be brain surgeons, and maybe the objective of your research is because you want to come up with some strategies that will enable more girls to be encouraged to become brain surgeons. So the two are often connected in respect to sort of, in an ideal world, what we'd like the outcome to be. And then in your first research methods assignment, you thought about methodological frameworks. So what methodological framework does your research sit in, and why are you proposing to do the research in the way that you are? I'll keep looking here because I've got my prompts, so that's I'm not daydreaming. And then give us an outline of your research design. So how are you designing your research? What are your methods going to be? So is this going to be mixed methods? Is it going to be a qualitative study that's using interviews and focus groups, or an intervention study? And then how are you going to collect your data? So what are your actual methods, and what is your techniques for acquiring a sample? And it's just, these are not cast in stone, so you're not tied to these ideas, but it's just basically to demonstrate that you understand how your research question and what it is you want to know links to the choice of methods that you've made, and why you feel that those are the most appropriate ways of answering your question, because you get asked this in Viva for sure. So justifying is the key through all of your writing, not just describing, but justifying, demonstrating you understand why it's a good approach, but also how you might, in fact, thought about doing it in a different way if you'd wanted to. Then give an outline of your methods for data analysis. So you've had a little bit of an insight into SPSS, you've had a little bit of insight into and statistics, sorry, and a little bit of an insight into qualitative data analysis. So have a think about how you might manage the data that you collect, so you're not tied to any particular approach, but it's about demonstrating that there are methodological positions you can take on your approach to data analysis, and sometimes your approach to data analysis may simply be a pragmatic one. It's the one that is most suitable for the data that you've got. And then just give a brief consideration of ethics. So obviously we're going to look at this in the next weekend, but there are all the issues around informed consent, etc, etc, etc. So yes, you'll obviously have to get the consent of various people, but I guess when I'm thinking about ethics, I'm thinking much more in relation to who you are in the context of your study. So if you're a head teacher, for example, and you're wanting to do research with your students, how might you go about giving students the right to truly participate willingly, without worrying that they're going to upset the head teacher? So it's thinking about some of the tensions around the relationships between you and the people that you want to collect information from. And then sort of finish up primarily, I don't know why I said primarily, finish up with a contribution to knowledge discussion. So thinking about drawing out what you hope your research will add to our understanding of the area, and in particular whether you think that as a consequence of your research there can be some impact on practice. Because obviously in an ideal world we do research that makes a difference, but it doesn't always work out that way. I'm still waiting to do the piece of research that changes the world, but I might be waiting a long time. And then if you can, conclude with a discussion of the potential problems and limitations of your research. So sometimes, believe it or not, in a Viva I will spend quite a bit of time on this, because people don't often consider how their research is limited by their sample, for example. I had somebody recently who was looking at attitudes towards teaching a particular topic, and I won't say any more than that in case it identifies the person, but he had used a very specific sample, or all females, all white, and then drew some conclusions without recognizing that actually a different type of sample might have yielded different types of results. Doesn't mean that you have to use different samples, it just means you recognize how Sometimes doing something in a slightly different way or with different people might produce different results. It just demonstrates your ability to critique your own work and understand that it's not a perfect piece of work. So then if we look at the criteria for assessment, really the key things that I'm interested in, so you can write a really beautiful research proposal, but really what I'm looking for when I'm going to be marking your proposals is the research question and your rationale for doing it. So do you offer a clear reason for why the research is worth doing, and is that situated nicely within that literature? So can I see where it fits? Is the research design that you've chosen justified, and is it linked to the research questions? So can I see how the methods are designed to enable you to get at the aims and objectives of your research, to really be able to answer and find out the things that you wanted to know, the things you'd stated were important to you, and then that consideration of the contribution to knowledge and practice, because obviously, as I said right at the beginning, that's the key criteria that a doctorate's awarded on. Okay, so that's the assignment. So just a couple of other points. So you've asked about self-plagiarism. Yes, you can't self-plagiarize verbatim, but of course, as I said in my email to you, the idea of the ED is to develop your ideas and your thinking, and so this research proposal, if everything goes really well, will be your starting point, and you'll just go straight off and start part B. And for some of you, it will be the beginnings of your ideas, and your ideas will need to develop a little bit more, because perhaps some of you are still not quite 100% sure about which way you want your research to go. And then the other possible scenario is that you develop a proposal in an area that's not my specialism, let's say quantum physics, and then when you are allocated your supervisor may suggest an alternative way of doing the research in terms of research design, and that's all perfectly normal. So I hope that's answered your questions, and I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I could say. I don't think there is. So we will meet again next month anyway, and I will answer any questions you have then. Okay. Bye-bye.